The chilling encounter still haunts my waking thoughts, a vivid tapestry woven from primal fear and an overwhelming sense of cosmic insignificance. It happened deep within the sprawling, untamed wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, a place where the ancient trees stood like silent sentinels, guarding secrets far older than recorded history. I remember the pervasive scent of damp earth and pine, the hushed symphony of the forest that usually brought me solace, now a prelude to something profoundly unsettling. It began with an almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere, a heavy stillness that seeped into my bones, long before my eyes registered the impossible. There, at the edge of my vision, where the shadows stretched long and distorted, stood an enigma that would forever alter my perception of reality. Its massive form, silhouetted against the fading light, felt less like an animal and more like a primordial force, an ancient spirit awakened. And then it moved, deliberately, with a purpose that transcended mere instinct, pointing a gnarled, powerful arm towards a landscape of horror, a field of bleached bones that whispered tales of forgotten giants. The memory is a cold knot in my stomach, a constant reminder of the fragile veil separating our known world from the truly unknown. This story, however, doesn't begin with that terrifying revelation, but months earlier, with a man driven by an insatiable curiosity and an unwavering dedication to the wild. Daniel, that's me. For years, my life has been defined by the lens of my camera and the endless expanse of America's most remote forests. I am a wilderness photographer, yes, but more accurately, I am a seeker of the untouched, a documentarian of the planet's raw, untamed beauty. My studio is the open sky, my subjects the rugged mountains, the ancient trees, the elusive wildlife. I've trekked through Alaskan tundras, navigated the dense bayous of Louisiana, and scaled the dizzying peaks of the Rockies, always in pursuit of that perfect, pristine moment. Solitude is my constant companion, and the silence of the deep woods, my preferred symphony. It's a life of relentless physical demand and profound spiritual reward, a constant dance with nature's whims and wonders. I am known for my solitary expeditions, often venturing where few dare to tread, driven by a desire to capture the world as it was, long before humanity's touch marred its perfection. My photographs aren't just images. They are testaments to the Earth's enduring majesty, windows into places few will ever see with their own eyes. It was during one such expedition, deep within a particularly unexplored section of the Olympic National Forest, that the first tremors of the extraordinary began. I had chosen this region specifically for its reputation as one of the least trodden areas in the contiguous United States, a true blank space on most maps. Days blurred into a rhythm of hiking, photographing, and setting up camp, each sunset painting a masterpiece across the towering canopies. My current objective was to find and document a rare species of moss, said to thrive only in this specific microclimate. The trek had been arduous, marked by dense undergrowth, hidden ravines, and the pervasive, almost suffocating silence that only truly ancient forests possess. It was on the third week, after navigating a particularly treacherous ridge, that I stumbled upon them, carved into the rough bark of an ancient Douglas fir at eye level, were symbols unlike anything I had ever encountered. They weren't graffiti, nor were they the familiar markings of indigenous tribes. These glyphs were deep, weathered, almost softened by centuries of rain and wind, yet their geometric precision was unmistakable. Lines, spirals, and what looked eerily like stylized depictions of celestial bodies or strange angular creatures spoke of an intelligence, a deliberate hand, a message etched into the very fabric of the forest. The carvings continued, appearing sporadically on other trees as I pushed deeper, a silent breadcrumb trail leading further into the unknown. Each new glyph sent a shiver down my spine, a prickle of unease that settled deep in my gut. This wasn't natural. This was art, communication, a declaration from an unseen presence. My scientific curiosity, usually a reassuring anchor, began to fray at the edges, replaced by a growing sense of wonder and a hint of trepidation. The forest, which I had always considered my dominion, suddenly felt like someone else's territory, a place I was merely permitted to visit. The air grew heavy with unspoken questions, each glyph a silent challenge, an undeniable sign that I was no longer alone in this primeval wilderness. This discovery, seemingly innocuous at first, was the key that unlocked the door to an unimaginable truth, a truth whispered by towering trees and etched into ancient stone, waiting for someone to finally read its terrifying message. My rational mind struggled to categorize these markings, constantly sifting through explanations, from forgotten pre-Columbian cultures to elaborate hoaxes. But deep down, a more primal part of me recognized the truth. I was on the brink of something monumental, something that defied conventional understanding. The glyphs were a call, a silent beckoning into a realm beyond the ordinary, and I, a solitary photographer, was about to answer. Before we delve deeper into Daniel's incredible journey, remember to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on more true encounters. The unfamiliar sounds grew in intensity as Daniel pushed deeper into the ancient woodland. What began as the subtle rustling of leaves under an unseen weight had morphed into distinct, heavy thumps, often followed by the sharp crack of a broken branch. He felt an undeniable shift in the forest's disposition, a subtle change in the air that spoke of an unseen presence. His scientific curiosity, usually a stalwart companion, began to curdle into a profound unease. The shadows, once merely abstract shapes cast by the dense canopy, now seemed to coalesce and stretch, darting at the periphery of his vision. He'd pause, camera in hand, straining his ears, the silence that followed each strange noise more unsettling than the noise itself. It was the absolute certainty of being watched, that prickling sensation on his neck, that truly began to fray his nerves. He tried to rationalize it away. Woodland creatures, the wind playing tricks, an overactive imagination fueled by isolation. But the logical explanations felt flimsy against the growing weight of intuition. The feeling intensified with each passing day, a pervasive sense of being scrutinized, analyzed. He found himself scanning the tree line more often, his once relaxed gait now interspersed with quick, jerky movements as he spun around, catching nothing but the unblinking gaze of the forest itself. His camp, usually a sanctuary of solitude, began to feel exposed, vulnerable. He'd wake in the dead of night, heart pounding, convinced he'd heard something outside his tent, a deep, resonant sigh, or the quiet shuffle of immense feet. Each time, he'd peer out into the inky blackness, seeing only the familiar silhouettes of trees, yet the feeling of being observed never truly receded. Then came the unequivocal evidence, stark and undeniable. While traversing a particularly damp, mossy ravine, Daniel stumbled upon them. Footprints. Not the prints of a bear, though immense, nor of any known North American wildlife. These were distinctly hominid, elongated and wide, with a defined heel and 5 toes, yet far, far larger than any human foot he had ever encountered. The arch was pronounced, the stride impossibly long, indicating a creature of incredible power and weight. The damp earth held their impression with chilling clarity. These weren't subtle marks. They were deep indentations, fresh, as if left only hours prior. His breath caught in his throat, his initial scientific hypothesis that he might be encountering an isolated, uncatalogued primate species suddenly felt ludicrously understated. This was something far more profound, far more unsettling. He was not alone. The creature leaving these massive prints was not hostile, he sensed, but intensely watchful. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The glyphs, the sounds, the feeling of being watched. It all coalesced into a single, astounding truth. Bigfoot, the legendary, mythical beast of folklore, was real, and it was here, in this remote stretch of wilderness, observing him. A surge of professional thrill mixed with a potent cocktail of fear and awe. This was it, the ultimate discovery for a wilderness photographer, a chance to document the impossible. But the fear remained, a cold knot in his stomach. What was its intent? Why had it allowed him to come so close? He knew he couldn't leave without more. He needed proof, clear and unambiguous. His approach shifted from merely documenting nature to actively seeking interaction, albeit a cautious one. He began setting up his most robust camera traps, positioning them strategically around his camp and near the path where he'd found the prints. These weren't mere motion-activated cameras. They were rugged, military-grade units, equipped with infrared night vision and remote triggers, designed to withstand the harshest elements and capture elusive wildlife. He disguised them carefully, blending them into the foliage, hoping to catch a glimpse, a fleeting image of his unseen observer. He also began to leave offerings, recalling stories and anecdotes he'd dismissed as fanciful tales. He started placing small piles of food, dried fruit, nuts, even some of his own dehydrated meat rations, on prominent rocks near the edge of his camp, always visible, but not directly within his immediate perimeter. It was an ancient gesture, a peace offering to the wilderness spirit, or in this case, to the giant hominid that clearly shared this territory. He hoped it would communicate his non-threatening intentions, perhaps even entice the creature to reveal itself more fully. Each morning, he'd check the offerings, his heart thrumming with anticipation. Sometimes they were untouched, but on other occasions, he'd find them gone, leaving behind only the faintest impression in the moss, a slight disturbance in the soil, or a subtle change in the air, a scent almost imperceptible, a musky, earthy odor that vanished as quickly as it appeared. The creature was there, lurking, observing, and occasionally cautiously accepting. The game was on, a silent, tense negotiation between man and myth. Deep in the heart of the American wilderness, Daniel knew he was on the precipice of something extraordinary, something that would redefine not only his understanding of the natural world, but perhaps humanity's place within it. The unease persisted, but it was now laced with an almost desperate yearning for a clearer glimpse, a more direct interaction. He was ready to push the boundaries, to see what else this watchful, silent giant might reveal as Daniel continued his solitary vigil within the dense embrace of the ancient forest. The encounters with the elusive Sasquatch escalated in both frequency and intensity, transforming his scientific curiosity into an intimate, if terrifying, dialogue. The creature, no longer content with distant observation, became increasingly brazen, its towering silhouette often materializing at the periphery of his camp during the deepest hours of night. He would wake, not to the rustling of leaves or the snap of twigs, but to an oppressive silence, a palpable shift in the air, the unmistakable sensation of immense presence. Peeking cautiously from the zippered entrance of his tent, Daniel would sometimes catch a fleeting glimpse of its immense form, a shadow darker than the surrounding night, moving with a fluid grace that belied its gargantuan size. Its eyes, he imagined, held an ancient wisdom, an intelligence far beyond mere animal instinct, a realization that sent shivers down his spine even as it fueled an almost reckless fascination. He was no longer merely observing a cryptid. He was being observed, assessed, and perhaps communicated with. The nocturnal visitations soon transitioned into something more direct, more profoundly perplexing. One morning, emerging from his tent after a night of fitful sleep, punctuated by unseen movements, Daniel discovered a curious arrangement of sticks and stones just outside his makeshift shelter. They weren't haphazardly strewn. Instead, they formed a distinct pattern, a crude, almost geometric shape that seemed deliberate. A small, smooth riverstone sat precisely atop a horizontally laid branch, which in turn rested on two smaller, vertically placed sticks. It was a primitive sculpture, an intentional act, a message in a language he couldn't yet decipher. His heart pounded with a mix of awe and trepidation. Was this a warning? A greeting? Or something else entirely? He approached the arrangement cautiously, examining it from every angle, his camera forgotten for a moment, as his mind raced to comprehend the meaning behind this silent, natural artifact. Days turned into weeks, and these enigmatic offerings became a recurring phenomenon. Sometimes it was a spiral of pebbles, other times a cairn of flat stones, always placed with an undeniable sense of purpose. Daniel began to document each new arrangement, meticulously sketching their patterns in his journal, theorizing about their potential significance. He left small, non-perishable food items, like dried fruit and nuts, at a respectful distance from his camp, hoping to reciprocate this strange form of communication, to show he understood a gesture was being made, even if the meaning remained elusive. He never saw the creature take the offerings, but they would always be gone by morning, leaving behind only the undisturbed soil and a heightened sense of connection. Despite the primal fear that occasionally gripped him, Daniel maintained a scrupulous, non-threatening demeanor. He never made sudden movements, never raised his voice, and always kept his camera on a tripod, never pointed directly at the suspected locations of the creature's presence. He spoke aloud sometimes, narrating his thoughts to the quiet forest, hoping his calm, measured tones would convey his peaceful intentions. He often felt its gaze upon him, a silent weight from the surrounding foliage, an invisible scrutiny that pierced through the deepest parts of his being. Yet there was no aggression, no overt display of hostility, only this persistent, watchful presence, this intricate dance of communication through silence and symbol. This growing, unspoken trust was a tenuous thread, woven between two vastly different species. Daniel, a man of science and logic, found himself navigating a world beyond his wildest academic dreams, grappling with a sentience that defied all known classifications. The Bigfoot, in turn, seemed to tolerate his intrusion, observing him with an almost judicial patience. It was as if Daniel was undergoing an initiation, a slow, deliberate process of acceptance into a secret realm. He began to interpret even the subtle shifts in the forest's ambient sounds as clues to its proximity. A rustle of leaves that was too heavy, a snap of a branch that was too deliberate. His senses, honed by years in the wilderness, were now exquisitely tuned to the presence of his giant observer. The sheer scale of the creature, glimpsed through the dappled light of the forest, was a constant reminder of its power. Its movements were fluid, almost ghost-like, for something so massive. Yet when it stood still, it became a part of the ancient trees themselves, its fur blending seamlessly with the dark bark and deep shadows. He witnessed it one evening, silhouetted against the dying embers of sunset, standing motionless for what felt like an eternity, its head tilted slightly, an almost contemplative posture. That image etched itself into Daniel's memory, reinforcing the notion that this was not merely an animal driven by instinct, but a being capable of thought, observation, and perhaps even complex emotion. He remembered a profound sense of loneliness that had often accompanied his solitary expeditions, a quiet yearning for connection amidst the vastness of nature. Now, paradoxically, in the presence of this unknown giant, that loneliness had been replaced by a different sensation, a profound awareness of shared existence, an unsettling yet exhilarating feeling of being part of something larger, something ancient and mysterious. He was no longer just Daniel, the photographer. He was an unwitting participant in an unfolding enigma, a silent conversation with the wilderness's most guarded secret. The forest, once a place of serene escape, had transformed into a living, breathing entity, its pulse synchronized with the hidden movements of its colossal inhabitant. Every rustle was a whisper, every shadow a potential revelation, every stone arrangement a chapter in a story he was only just beginning to read. The dread of the unknown had slowly begun to morph into an eager anticipation, a strange yearning for the next cryptic message, the next silent encounter that would deepen his understanding of this incredible, impossible being. The air grew heavy, with an unspoken anticipation as twilight deepened, painting the ancient forest in hues of deep violet and fading gold. Daniel sat by his carefully dampened campfire, the crackle of burning wood, the only sound disturbing the profound silence. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness beyond the tree line, immense and imposing, yet fluid in its approach. It was the Bigfoot, closer than it had ever been, its colossal form now fully visible, without the usual veil of obscuring foliage. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the quiet solemnity of the moment. He instinctively reached for his camera, then hesitated. This felt different, more intimate, more profound than any previous encounter. The creature's eyes, pools of impenetrable darkness, fixed on his, and Daniel felt an almost physical jolt. There was no aggression, no discernible threat, but something far more potent, an unusual depth of emotion that transcended simple instinct. It was a gaze that spoke of ancient wisdom, of sorrow, and of an urgent, silent plea. The Bigfoot slowly extended a massive three-fingered hand, not towards him, but in a motion that unmistakably beckoned him forward. It was an invitation, a gesture so clear that Daniel, despite the primal fear that coiled in his gut, understood it instantly. His mind raced, cataloging the risks, weighing the sheer audacity of what was being offered. To follow this mythical creature, alone, into the heart of an untamed wilderness, was to step beyond the boundaries of everything he knew, to abandon all pretense of scientific objectivity and embrace the utterly inexplicable. Yet, a powerful, almost magnetic pull drew him. The trust accumulated over weeks of silent observation, the shared moments of inexplicable connection, now culminated in this pivotal instant. Overcoming the sheer terror that threatened to paralyze him, Daniel slowly rose, extinguishing the last embers of his fire with a careful scoop of dirt. He slung his pack over his shoulder, the weight of his equipment feeling strangely reassuring, a tether to the rational world he was about to leave behind. He met the Bigfoot's gaze, nodded once, a gesture of acceptance, and took his first hesitant step into the deepening shadows towards the waiting giant. The creature turned, its movements surprisingly gentle for its size, and began to lead the way. The journey into the unknown was unlike anything Daniel had ever experienced. The Bigfoot moved with an effortless grace, its massive frame navigating the dense undergrowth and uneven terrain as if it were an extension of itself. Daniel struggled to keep pace, his human limitations starkly obvious against the creature's natural prowess. They moved deeper, far deeper, into a part of the forest he had never dared to explore, an expanse marked on no map, whispered about only in hushed tones by the most seasoned of local hunters. The air grew cooler, heavier, imbued with the scent of damp earth and ancient pines. Sunlight, which had already been scarce in this thick canopy, now barely filtered through, creating a perpetual twilight. The Bigfoot didn't speak, yet its presence was a constant guide. It would pause occasionally, turning its head slightly to ensure Daniel was still following, its dark eyes briefly meeting his, before resuming its relentless, purposeful trek. There were moments when Daniel's resolve wavered, when the sheer magnitude of his situation threatened to overwhelm him. What if this was a trap? What if the creature's intentions were not as benign as they seemed? But each time, the memory of those expressive eyes, the unspoken urgency in its gesture, reaffirmed his decision. He was being led, not coerced, and a strange sense of destiny settled upon him. As they pressed on, the forest began to change. The trees grew older, their trunks wider, their branches gnarled and twisted into grotesque but beautiful shapes. The undergrowth, instead of becoming impenetrable, seemed to open in places, revealing hidden paths that appeared ancient and deliberately concealed. These weren't animal trails. They were too regular, too structured for mere wildlife. They were almost like corridors, winding through the dense foliage, barely visible to an untrained eye. The Bigfoot moved along these paths as if they were familiar highways, occasionally pushing aside a hanging vine or a low-slung branch, not just for itself, but for Daniel to pass through more easily. It was a small, subtle gesture, yet profoundly considerate, further cementing Daniel's belief in the creature's intelligence and benevolent intent. These hidden roots spoke of a long history, of generations perhaps, who had traversed these secret passages, maintaining them as if for a specific purpose. Daniel's mind raced, trying to conceptualize who could have created such pathways and why. The deeper they went, the more he understood that these were not random clearings, but a carefully maintained network, a clandestine infrastructure woven into the fabric of the forest itself. He found himself ducking under ancient, moss-covered archways of intertwined branches, stepping over roots that formed natural stairs, and navigating narrow defiles bordered by stones that seemed to have been strategically placed. Each step further unveiled a wilderness that was not wild in the chaotic sense, but one carefully managed, sculpted even by an unseen hand, or rather by large, shaggy hands. The forest was revealing its deepest secrets, not through aggressive display, but through quiet, patient invitation, guided by its ancient guardian. The air hummed with an almost palpable energy, a sense of approaching revelation that tightened Daniel's chest with a mixture of fear and breathtaking anticipation. He was no longer just following a legend. He was walking directly into it. The day Daniel decided to abandon his carefully constructed scientific detachment arrived with an unnerving stillness. It was dusk, the forest exhaling the day's warmth in long, slow breaths, when the Bigfoot finally made its move. Daniel sat by his dwindling campfire, lost in thought, the familiar scent of pine and damp earth clinging to him. A rustle, closer than any before, broke his reverie. He looked up, his heart thudding a primal rhythm against his ribs. The immense silhouette of the creature stood at the very edge of his camp, no longer merely observing, but present, tangible. Its eyes, deep pools reflecting the fading light, held an intensity that was far more than animalistic. There was a plea there, an urgency that transcended any fear Daniel had previously felt. The creature slowly extended a massive hand, palm open, then turned and gestured into the deeper, darker woods, a clear, unmistakable invitation. A cold dread coiled in Daniel's stomach, a primitive instinct screaming at him to flee, to retreat to the safety of his tent. Yet something in those ancient eyes, a profound sadness mixed with an unwavering resolve, held him captive. He thought of all the cryptic messages, the careful observations, the unspoken trust that had slowly, patiently been built between them. This wasn't an attack, it was a summons. Taking a shaky breath, Daniel extinguished his fire, grabbed his powerful headlamp and his satellite communicator, a thin lifeline to a world that felt impossibly distant, and with a resolve he hadn't known he possessed, nodded. The Bigfoot turned, its massive frame melting into the twilight, moving with a silent grace that belied its size. Daniel followed, stepping into the profound unknown, his fear slowly giving way to a burgeoning sense of awe and an unshakable conviction that he was on the precipice of something monumental. The journey was arduous, unlike any path Daniel had ever navigated. The Bigfoot led him away from the familiar game trails and established routes, deeper into a primeval section of the forest he had previously deemed impassable. They climbed steep, moss-covered inclines, traversed through thickets of thorn bushes that seemed to part effortlessly for the creature, but snagged at Daniel's clothing, and crossed ancient gnarled roots that formed natural bridges over unseen ravines. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of decaying leaves and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet, a scent he couldn't quite place. The forest became denser, darker, the canopy above almost entirely blocking out the stars, transforming the world into a claustrophobic tunnel of ancient wood and shadow. The Bigfoot moved with a deliberate slowness, occasionally glancing back, as if ensuring Daniel kept pace, a silent guardian leading him through a labyrinth only it knew. This was not a random wander. This was a purposeful pilgrimage. Hours passed, marked only by the growing ache in Daniel's muscles and the deepening silence of the night. The forest sounds, usually a symphony of rustles and chirps, had faded into an almost oppressive quiet, as if the very ecosystem held its breath. Then, without warning, the canopy broke. They emerged onto a plateau, a vast circular clearing bathed in the weak, diffused light, filtering through a thinning cloud cover. Daniel gasped, the air catching in his throat. Before him, stretching out under the pale moonlight, was a sight that defied all logic, all reason, all scientific understanding. It was a field of bones. Thousands upon thousands of them, bleached white against the dark earth, forming grotesque mounds and bizarre, abstract patterns. Skulls, femurs, ribs. An endless, grisly tapestry. But these were not the bones of deer or bears or any animal Daniel had ever encountered in the wild. And to his immediate, chilling realization, they were most certainly not Bigfoot bones. These were distinctly humanoid, yet impossibly large. Rib cages stretched wider than any human, femurs longer than his own torso, skulls with proportions that dwarfed even the largest gorilla skulls he'd seen in museums. A silent scream threatened to escape Daniel's lips, but he swallowed it, his mind reeling. These were giants, ancient, colossal humanoids whose remains lay scattered in this hidden graveyard. The Bigfoot stood beside him, its massive head bowed, its shoulders slumped in a posture of profound grief and unmistakable anguish. It let out a low, guttural moan, a sound that tore at Daniel's very soul, filled with a sorrow so deep it felt primeval. The creature then slowly raised an arm, its immense, hairy hand sweeping over the vast expanse of bones, a gesture of profound lamentation. Its gaze met Daniel's, and in those dark, intelligent eyes, Daniel saw not just pain, but an overwhelming burden of knowledge, a silent plea for understanding. The Bigfoot then pointed a thick, gnarled finger towards the bones, then brought its fist to its own massive chest, shaking its head slowly, emphatically. Not our kind. The message was crystal clear, a harrowing truth spoken without words. These grotesque remains, these monumental relics of a forgotten race, were not of the Sasquatch. Daniel felt a cold sweat prickle his skin, his mind struggling to process the impossible panorama before him. He stared at the bones, then at the desolate, grieving guardian beside him. The creature repeated the gesture, pointing to the bones, then to itself, shaking its head again, its sorrow palpable, its massive chest heaving with what sounded like suppressed sobs. It was trying to tell him something vital, something that had haunted it for untold generations. The Bigfoot then made a sweeping motion, encompassing the entire field, and then looked upward, its gaze fixed on the moon, a gesture full of ancient mystery. Daniel's breath hitched. These bones were ancient, far older than any conventional human history allowed. They were from a race of giants, and the Bigfoot, this elusive, intelligent creature, was its somber custodian, the silent witness to a history humanity had completely erased or simply never known. The truth was, slowly, terrifyingly, crystallizing in Daniel's mind. The Bigfoot was not just an animal. It was a sentinel, a keeper of a secret so profound, so earth-shattering, that it challenged the very foundations of human existence. The Bigfoot, having led Daniel through a labyrinth of forgotten trails to this unsettling ossuary, now performed a series of deliberate gestures that transcended mere communication. It swept its massive hand across the bone-strewn field, a movement heavy with a sorrow that resonated deep within Daniel's soul. Then, with an almost imperceptible shift, its gaze lifted, not to the surrounding canopy, but directly to the expanse of the sky above, a sky that had been a silent, indifferent witness to countless millennia. It pointed a thick, gnarled finger upward, then brought its hand down, in a swift, almost violent motion towards the ground, specifically indicating the scattered skeletal remains below. This was no random act. It was a narrative, a silent, powerful explanation unfolding before Daniel's astonished eyes. The message, though wordless, was startlingly clear, chillingly profound. The creature was implying, with tragic clarity, an external origin for the demise of these giants, a cosmic event, perhaps a cataclysm that had rained down from the heavens, extinguishing an ancient race, leaving only these monumental relics as silent testaments. The bones, therefore, were not merely ancient. They were monuments to a celestial tragedy, grim markers of a distant, devastating impact. Daniel felt a cold dread trickle down his spine, not just from the implication of such an event, but from the realization that this creature, this mythical being, was carrying a memory of it, a burden of witnessing an apocalypse. A deep, silent understanding passed between Daniel and the Bigfoot in that moment, a connection forged in the crucible of shared wonder and unspeakable sorrow. It wasn't merely empathy, it was an intellectual and emotional bridge, spanning the vast chasm between species. Daniel looked into the creature's immense ancient eyes and saw not just intelligence, but wisdom born of eons, a profound, almost spiritual depth. He understood then, with a crystalline clarity, that this being was not just an animal, a primitive relic of a bygone era. It was a sentient guardian, a silent sentinel of an unimaginable past, a living library of unwritten history, a witness to events that defied human comprehension and challenged every established scientific dogma. The Bigfoot was a keeper of secrets, a protector of a truth too vast, too disturbing for the modern world to easily accept. Its role, Daniel now intuited, was not to integrate with humanity, but to preserve these sacred, terrifying truths from the ravages of time and human short-sightedness. The implications of what he had seen and understood crashed over Daniel like a tidal wave. The existence of these massive, undeniably humanoid remains, combined with the Bigfoot's silent, gestural narrative of their demise, shattered his preconceived notions of human history and evolution. Everything he had been taught, every textbook he had read, every scientific theory he had accepted, crumbled in the face of this tangible, horrifying evidence. If these giants had existed, and if their end had come from the sky, what did that say about the known timeline of Earth, about the origins of life, about the very narrative of consciousness? The very fabric of reality seemed to shimmer and distort around him. He felt utterly overwhelmed, a small, insignificant man standing amidst the ruins of a forgotten world, privy to a secret that could, and perhaps should, remain buried. The burden of this newfound knowledge pressed down upon him, heavy and suffocating. It was not merely an academic revelation, it was an existential crisis. He had stumbled upon a truth that recontextualized not just human history, but the very nature of existence. The fear that had initially gripped him, the primal dread of encountering a cryptid, had been replaced by a terror of a different kind. The terror of cosmic insignificance, the profound disquietude of discovering that the universe held secrets so vast, so ancient, that they dwarfed humanity's entire recorded history. He felt a profound sense of isolation, knowing that he now carried a truth that virtually no one would believe, a story so extraordinary it would be dismissed as madness. The bones lay scattered, bleached by sun and time, each one a silent scream across the millennia. They spoke of a lineage far grander, far more ancient than Homo sapiens, a lineage that Earth had nurtured and then, perhaps, violently purged. The Bigfoot's mournful presence, its shared grief, underscored the tragedy. It was a living connection to that lost era, a bridge between the unimaginable past and an unknowing present. Daniel looked at the creature with new eyes, seeing not a monster, but a sentient being weighed down by a responsibility it had carried for untold ages. Its solitude in these deep woods was not a choice of reclusiveness, but perhaps a necessary guardianship, a silent vigil over the graves of a forgotten civilization. The sheer weight of this ancient secret, entrusted to him through silent gestures and profound ancient eyes, was almost unbearable. He was no longer just a photographer documenting nature. He was an unwilling historian, a reluctant archaeologist of a lost cosmic truth. The world, as he knew it, had irrevocably shifted on its axis. The immense, shaggy form of the Bigfoot seemed to dissolve into the deepening shadows as quietly as it had appeared, leaving Daniel entirely alone amidst the colossal, silent testament to a forgotten age. There was no farewell, no final gesture, only an absorption back into the primeval forest from which it had emerged. The absence of its towering presence left an echoing void, amplifying the chilling reality of his surroundings. Daniel stood there for a long time, the cold seeping into his bones, the scent of damp earth and decay filling his lungs, his gaze fixated on the bleached remains. The air still hummed with the creature's recent presence, a spiritual residue that clung to the oppressive quiet. He was utterly stranded in a moment suspended between what he thought he knew and an overwhelming, terrifying new truth. The sun had begun its descent, painting the sky with hues of bruised purple and fiery orange, a stark contrast to the grim tableau before him. He knew he had to move, to find his way back to the relative safety of his camp, but his limbs felt heavy, anchored by the gravity of the revelation. Every fiber of his being screamed for escape from this place, yet a morbid fascination, a profound sense of responsibility, held him rooted. He traced the outline of a massive rib cage with his eyes, imagining the creature it once housed, trying to reconcile its existence with any known biology or history. It was an exercise in futility. The evidence before him defied all scientific paradigms, all historical records. These bones were a fundamental challenge to the human species' self-narrative, a testament to a grander, more terrifying past. As twilight deepened, pulling a cloak of shadows over the bone field, Daniel finally forced himself to turn away. The path back seemed impossibly long, fraught with the psychological weight of his discovery. Each step was a conscious effort, his mind replaying the Bigfoot's gestures. The profound sorrow in its eyes, the slow, deliberate sweep of its arm towards the heavens. He walked like a man in a dream, his senses dulled to the familiar sounds of the forest, his entire focus consumed by the internal battle raging within him. What now? What was he supposed to do with this? The journey back to his small, familiar campsite, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now seemed like an artificial construct, a flimsy barrier against an incomprehensible reality. His tent, his gear, his mundane preparations for a simple wilderness photography trip felt ludicrously inadequate in the face of what he had witnessed. He spent a sleepless night, the image of the bone field seared behind his eyelids, the Bigfoot's unspoken words echoing in the vast emptiness of the ancient forest. The magnitude of the secret pressed down on him, a crushing weight that threatened to suffocate his very soul. The next morning brought no solace, only the harsh clarity of decision. He rose with the first light, the chill air doing little to numb the turmoil within. The forest, once a place of serene escape and photographic opportunity, now felt like a living entity, an ancient consciousness that had allowed him a glimpse into its deepest, most guarded memories. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that he could not simply pack up his cameras and return to civilization as if nothing had happened. He carried a burden, an impossible truth that demanded acknowledgement. The debate raged within him with fierce intensity. Reveal it. To whom? How? The scientific community would scoff, demanding irrefutable proof. Proof that he doubted he could provide without desecrating the sacred site, without betraying the trust of the Bigfoot. Governments would undoubtedly seize control, turning the ancient burial ground into a research facility, a spectacle, destroying its sanctity and potentially endangering the creatures who guarded it. The public would either dismiss it as a hoax or descend into a frenzy of speculation and fear, potentially leading to an unprecedented assault on the wilderness, a gold rush for ancient giants. The consequences of revealing such a truth felt catastrophic, far outweighing any personal recognition he might receive. He imagined the headlines, the ridicule, the inevitable scramble to exploit or destroy the site. And what about the Bigfoot, Its existence was itself a fragile secret, protected by its elusive nature and the vastness of the wild. To expose the bone field would be to expose the guardian, to strip away its sanctuary, to invite the very destruction it had so diligently sought to prevent. No, he decided, with a heavy heart. Direct revelation was not an option. The world was not ready, and perhaps never would be. The weight of suppression was almost as heavy as the weight of the secret itself. He, Daniel, a simple photographer, was now a keeper of an ancient cosmic truth, bound by an unspoken pact with a creature from myth. He would carry this alone, a silent sentinel of a forgotten history. The thought of this solitary burden, of living with such knowledge, yet remaining silent, filled him with a profound sense of isolation. He spent the next few days in a daze, meticulously dismantling his camp, packing his gear, but his mind was miles away, still wandering among the colossal bones. He took no more photographs of the vibrant forest life, his artistic eye now dimmed by the overwhelming scale of the prehistoric tragedy he had witnessed. His focus had shifted from capturing fleeting beauty to grappling with eternal questions. Finally, with a last, lingering look back into the impenetrable depths of the forest, a place now imbued with a terrifying reverence, Daniel turned and began his long journey out. Each step away from the bone field and the silent guardian was a step further into a world that remained oblivious, a world that continued its mundane existence, unaware of the profound, disturbing revelations hidden beneath the canopy of ancient trees. He was leaving the wilderness, but the wilderness and its monumental secret would never truly leave him. He carried it within, a permanent scar on his psyche, a silent understanding that forever altered his perception of reality, history, and humanity's place in the vast, mysterious tapestry of existence. The world he was returning to felt small, insignificant, and profoundly ignorant. The journey back to his base camp was a blur of primal instinct and profound introspection. Daniel moved through the familiar forest paths as if in a trance. The image of the bone field seared into his mind, the Bigfoot's silent, sorrowful explanation echoing in the chambers of his soul. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, held a new, ominous significance. The wilderness, once a sanctuary, now pulsed with ancient secrets, a veil lifted to reveal depths he had never imagined. He ate little, slept less, his mind a maelstrom of theories, fears, and a crushing sense of responsibility. The weight of the Bigfoot's trust, the silent plea in its eyes, pressed down on him with an almost physical force. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he could not, would not, betray that trust. The question of what to do with this colossal, world-altering knowledge gnawed at him relentlessly. To reveal it outright would be to unleash chaos. The scientific community would scoff. The mainstream media would sensationalize and then dismiss. And the remote sanctuary of the Bigfoot and its sacred trust would be irrevocably compromised. He envisioned hordes of researchers, thrill-seekers, and exploiters descending upon the valley, desecrating the bone field, disrupting the delicate balance the Bigfoot had so meticulously maintained for millennia. The thought was unbearable. His promise to the silent guardian, unspoken yet deeply felt, held more sway than any desire for personal fame or scientific validation. He had witnessed a profound truth, not just about an ancient race, but about the enduring wisdom of the natural world and its protectors. Instead, Daniel resolved to document his experience in a way that honored the secret, hinting at its existence without ever fully exposing it. His photographs, already renowned for their evocative power, would become something more profound, He would capture the essence of the ancient forest, the profound solitude, the fleeting glimpses of hidden life, and subtly infuse them with the echoes of what he had witnessed. His camera became an extension of his soul, each click a whispered testament to the giants, to the Bigfoot, and to the cosmic drama that had unfolded in that isolated valley. He photographed the gnarled roots of ancient trees that might have stood guard for millennia, the way light filtered through the canopy, sometimes appearing to illuminate remnants of colossal forms in the shadows. He sought out geological formations that spoke of immense ancient forces, framing them in compositions that suggested an age beyond human comprehension. Upon his return to civilization, the world felt small. The hustle and bustle, the trivial concerns of urban life, seemed utterly inconsequential against the backdrop of an Earth that harbored such monumental secrets. He spent months in his studio, not just developing film, but sifting through the emotional and intellectual debris of his encounter. His new collection, titled Echoes of the Primeval, defied easy categorization. It wasn't just landscape photography. It was an exploration of mystery, a meditation on time, a visual poem about the unseen forces that shaped our planet. He deliberately left certain images ambiguous, creating composite shots that subtly suggested colossal shapes hidden within the natural contours of the land, or textures that mimicked ancient petrified bone. He wrote accompanying philosophical musings for his exhibition catalog, speaking in veiled terms of the silent witnesses, the forgotten architects of history, and truths whispered by the wind in ancient forests. The public reception was varied. Some saw exquisite art, a master photographer's deep connection to nature. Others were unsettled, finding a strange, almost disturbing resonance in the images, a feeling of vastness and unacknowledged history. A few, the more esoteric thinkers, sensed something deeper, a hidden narrative beneath the surface, but none could articulate precisely what it was. And that, Daniel realized, was precisely the point. He had planted seeds of doubt, fostered a quiet curiosity, without ever revealing the sacred trust. He was challenging perceptions, inviting people to look closer, to question the accepted narratives without ever breaking his vow to the Bigfoot. His connection with the Bigfoot, though physical contact was limited to that single, unforgettable journey, remained the most profound relationship of his life. It was a bond forged in silence, in shared awe and shared burden. He understood now that humanity was not alone in its striving for truth, nor was it the sole inheritor of Earth's wisdom. The Bigfoot, that ancient sentient being, represented a guardian class, a living bridge to a past that defied human arrogance and hubris. Daniel had been humbled, yes, but also profoundly enriched. He carried within him the unique perspective of someone who had peered beyond the thin veil of contemporary understanding into the raw, unfathomable depths of Earth's true history. This encounter instilled in him an unshakable reverence for the unknown, a deep respect for the wild places and the secrets they held. He became a quieter man, his gaze often distant, contemplating horizons far beyond the visible. The forest for him was no longer just a place of beauty, but a living archive, a sacred trust. He understood that the greatest mysteries often exist, not to be solved, but to be revered, to remind us of our place in a universe far grander and more complex than we can ever fully comprehend. He realized that the Bigfoot's existence was not an anomaly to be captured and studied, but a profound testament to the diverse, intelligent, and ancient life forms that share our planet, quietly carrying the weight of history in their silent, watchful presence. He would continue to photograph, to explore, but always with a new sensitivity, a new understanding that some truths are best preserved in the echoes of art, safeguarding the sacred silence that protects the oldest guardians of our world. What do you think these bones truly signify? Share your theories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more incredible stories, and click here to watch our next deep dive into unexplained phenomena.